She is a 4-time Olympic Gold Medalist.
So happy that people are seeing and respecting and appreciating how hard female athletes work to be at the top of their game.
Do this, push through it.
That's right. Walk it off.
You there, walk it off.
Yeah.
My girl, Sharí Nycole.
I probably realized I had emotional injuries, probably around 30.
The media spotlight is intentional.
That's not ladylike.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
to who?
Yeah.
Female athletes, especially young Black female athletes, do not feel this burden to fit into some mold or model.
Next on the Health Mastery Café.
Hey, it's Dr. Contessa, and you are watching the Health Mastery Cafe with Dr. Dave.
Okay, cafe connoisseurs, I want us to start this conversation about women in sports. And I couldn't do this by myself, and I had to bring in my girl, my guest co-host. She is an NAACP Image Award-nominated media personality, but I met her when she was behind the camera. She's a super producer, and that's where she had made her initial name for herself before she made a name for herself in front of the camera. The host of my favorite podcast, Just the Thought with Sharí Nycole. This is my girl, Sharí Nycole.
Your favorite podcast.
My favorite podcast.
My favorite podcast, not your favorite. Not your podcast. Is that what you're saying? The second favorite.
You're trying to trip me up.
I did try to trip you up right
Yeah.
there. I know I'm not your favorite. Your podcast should be your favorite.
It is my favorite podcast,
Okay.
but outside of this podcast, it is one of my favorite podcasts.
Well, you were a guest as well. And we had a great conversation.
We had
So I
a
appreciate
really
you.
great conversation.
Yes, we did.
I'm gonna link to that conversation
Come on,
in the YouTube in the description below. It took us a long time to get you in the cafe.
It felt like a year. Like it was
felt like a long
it's
time.
because I have too many jobs.
You are the hardest working woman in show business. And I actually wrote this down, right? Because I'm like, how does she do this? So, so the Essence platform, the entire platform, you're all over the platform. You're at the Essence Fest, but not just the festival. You're all over their platform.
Yeah.
And they're smart to do that. You're a co-host at the Willie Moore Jr. Show. You're your own host of your podcast, Just a Thought. You're a co-host on 3 on 3. She shows that let me just remind you here. Right? And she shows up every week on local news giving tips, right? And advice about how to live a happier life. That's just a little, you haven't told us everything else.
I forgot about. I honestly think that's it. It's funny when people send like a laundry list of what I actually do.
Yeah.
I'm kind of amazed, but I thank God and I'm really grateful. And I always just pray for the grace to be able to have the energy to do all of this.
How do you keep the energy? How do you stay mentally and physically?
Faith, family, and fitness. That's it for me. I mean, my spiritual journey in life is extremely important. It's number one priority for me.
Yeah.
I have an incredible family and village of friends and mentors and spiritual advisors that keep me honest, hold me accountable, and show me a lot of love and support.
Yeah.
And then fitness. I'm in the gym 5-6 days a week. You know how to play.
No, I know. I see it on social.
That's been my life since I was 13 years old. Started playing basketball at 8, but got my first personal trainer at 13. I'm 38 now. So for me, if I don't go to the gym, I feel crazy.
Yeah.
So those 3 things really just keep me centered and going. And it's like a big puzzle that,
the
good Lord helps me to solve.
It's working. I want to hear you more. I want to see you more. Obviously, I'm not the only one who wants to do that. As we said before, this is your time, sis. Right. You're up. Why don't we jump into this conversation about women in sports? Yeah. I don't know that everybody knows that you are like really an athlete. Like you played basketball all the way through college. Yeah. To help us understand where we are now with the game, just sports, not just the game, right? The big game, capital G.
Yeah.
Is it different now? And what's your perspective on?
It's different, but not because of women athletes. We've always been here. We've always worked hard.
Yeah.
We've always been great. I think everybody else is just now starting to realize it.
Yeah.
I will have to also acknowledge the power of social media, which also has allowed buy-ins from media outlets and broadcasting partners to be able to disseminate these games and competitions and these personalities and these storylines on a grander scale than we've had, I think, ever.
Yeah.
But we're bursting at the seams right now on all cylinders, and we have some incredible women leading the charge. I think the other piece of this is the personalities. When you think of a Sharí Richardson, when we think of an Angel Reese or a Caitlin Clark or an Asia Wilson, you think about, I want to know more about them. I want to see what they're going to do. And so people are buying into these women's personalities and then coming to understand, oh, wow, they're a hell of an athlete as well. And to see young ladies and young men latch on in this way, I'm excited about the future of women's sports and where it's going to go. This is it's like a solar eclipse.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't moments like this only happen so often, but they represent paradigm shifts in our society. And I think we're in a really big shift right now that's going to change the trajectory of women's sports from here on out.
And allowing the rest of society to see that it's okay to bring to bear your entire person.
Yes,
So
yes,
Simone Biles,
yes,
right?
yes.
So the idea that she could just say, nope, I'm actually going to stop right here in this competition
Yeah.
and say no because I'm more important than the
Absolutely.
rest of this game.
Absolutely.
Right, than the rest of these events. And it quite frankly, it would take a woman to be able to say, guess what, y'all, it's okay.
It's okay.
What's your thought about that? Are we seeing sports in a different, through a
You know
different
what's
lens?
funny when you bring up Simone Biles, because I had a different opinion when it first happened versus now.
Okay.
And getting to understand exactly what she was dealing with the twisties. I'd never heard of the twisties before then.
Right.
Watching her documentary, you know, because initially as an athlete first, male or female, you're taught, push through this, push through it.
That's right. Walk it off. That's it.
Walk it off.
Yeah.
Or do what you need to do and tape it up and go. And so when she initially
Concussion, yeah, you falling right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Initially bowed out gracefully, you know, in the last Olympic Games, I was pretty critical, like especially most former athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got to know more about her story and understand the dangers of her continuing to compete at that time, I said, oh, I was wrong on this. You know, who am I to say to someone who thinks that they could hurt themselves severely by continuing, you need to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think Simone Biles has allowed all athletes, and women athletes in particular, to be okay with understanding they're not emotionally or mentally okay and taking that break that they need.
And saying, I'm
And
not
yes,
okay.
And being unapologetic about it and saying, hey, if you have a problem with it, that's your problem. That's not mine. I'm going to protect myself. And I think women in general, especially Black women, have moved, especially in this country, so unprotected that we've gotten to a place now where we're like, we're not going to take it anymore. And if we have to stand in the gap for ourselves, we'll do that.
Yeah.
So I do think that has led to a change in women's sports, but in the best of ways. And people are having to understand this is what you get. And also the physicality of the game, the competitiveness. Again, it's always been there, but now you're looking and that's not ladylike.
Yeah.
According to who?
Yeah.
We're competing just like anybody else.
Absolutely. And it's actually bleeding over. So now the men are like, you know what? I'm not okay.
Yeah.
And that's going to keep us from the brain injuries and all of this other stuff where you're kind of tucking it in and not talking about it. Forget about just the physical injuries.
Yeah.
The emotional injuries. Men and women have emotional sides. It's what makes us who we are. And we should stop pretending like it's not a thing.
And can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Even for me at 38 years old, I probably realized I had emotional injuries, probably around 30, 31, really when I started getting into therapy. And I'm like, performanceism is weird. I shouldn't be functioning like this in my everyday life. And it performanceism. It affected my relationships. And also, the way that I was reared in sports, I wasn't given a lot of space to have emotional moments. Emotion in terms of tears or really breakdowns was prohibited. It's like, yo, you got to be strong. We don't have time for that.
Right.
And so there was nobody that really said, are you okay?
Right.
I didn't get that.
Right.
So
because your exterior had to be hard.
So when you come into adulthood and you haven't had that level of care, and it's no shade, adults around your coaches, they do the best they can.
Yeah.
But when you haven't had that level of care, you go through your life in a way that dismisses your emotions. And it hinders your ability to have emotional intelligence and also relate to other people, have empathy. And so I had to really do some digging and unpacking and understand, like, I can't allow that negligence from when I was younger and an athlete to carry into my relationships now. So it took a lot of work.
Absolutely. Well, but to say nothing of the actual physiologic impact that it has for you not doing that. So no matter if people still think, that's just subjective, it's real. Physiologic, biochemical changes when you experience those emotions, whether or not you dissipate them in an adaptive way, or you keep them inside. And we all have heard this before. Stress can kill.
It absolutely can.
Let's not let stress kill us.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you shared that with us. Let's pivot to these games, these Olympic Games, 2024 games. We are right upon them.
Yeah.
I can't wait to bring in my next guest. I'm really excited about this. My next guest needs absolutely no introduction whatsoever, but I just want to break this down for y'all, okay? She is a 4-time Olympic gold medalist in track and field. She is a 6-time world champion, and she holds the American record for the 400 meter. And I want to make sure you understand this. We got a concept of what the 100 meter is, but just imagine doing that 4 times. That's not just physically demanding. That's your whole person
Yeah.
demanding. And she holds the American record for it. She is a TV personality. You've seen her on the Housewives franchise. She has a new docuseries on Netflix called Sprint. You got to see it. She's a mom and she's a wife. Let us welcome to the cafe, Sanya Richards-Ross. Sanya!
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Dave. That was really nice. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So wait, so are you in Paris right now?
No, I leave for Paris on the 26th or 27th. So preparing for Paris, but still here in Atlanta.
So, take us into the minds of the athletes, right? They're about to be on the biggest stage of their lives. And that's not just saying, that's not lip service, that's real. The biggest stage of their lives. What's going through their heads? What are they thinking right now?
Man, it's for a lot of, especially American athletes, sometimes the hardest part of the journey they've just gone through, which is the US trials, which can be so difficult. And you will see, and we did see this year, that people will get left home who could win medals, right? So the hardest part is now behind them. So there's some relief, right? There is also this immense excitement because for most athletes, you've been dreaming of this your entire life, right? When I was 9 years old, I told my teacher I was going to be an Olympic champion. So it was a lifelong dream.
Wow.
That's crazy.
You were 9 years old?
Wow.
Yep, when I was 9 years old for a class assignment, I thought I was going to be an Olympic champ.
Wow.
So, and a lot of athletes will have similar stories where the dream started for them so early. So there's all this excitement, anticipation. Then, of course, there's a lot of nerves because for most athletes, that this is a 1 in a 4 year time experience, right? You got to wait 4 years for the next one. So there's a lot of nerves and anxiety and just all the things. But I know for most of them right now, they're just super excited. And I can't wait for them to experience an Olympics with fans in the stands. Remember in 2021, Tokyo had no fans. It was a very bizarre Olympic Games. But Paris is going to be the exact opposite. So it's going to be so much fun. And I can't wait for them.
So let me ask you this, Sonia. Let me ask you about your own experience. Like when you get to this setting, is your diet different? Are you sleeping more? Tell me about that.
I always tell people, and when I compete at my best is when I didn't change too much, right? You don't want to all of a sudden go into the biggest meet of your life and start changing things. Like the reason you got there is because what you were doing worked. And so I would say most of the athletes are doing a little bit more of the same. Obviously, our coaches are really peaking us. So the training is starting to really wind down so that your legs are fresh. You definitely want to focus on rest because you want to be rested. You want to be hydrated. So I want to say for most of the elite athletes, it's more of the same. And it's just really zoning in and getting mentally prepared to execute your best race when it counts the most.
So you mentioned more of the same, Sanya, and for the most part, Dr. Dave, the training and everything, there's a rubric for that. And I understand that. But I want to talk about the evolution of track and field just a little bit from the lens of obviously you being an Olympian and a gold medalist, but also from the lens of you as a commentator. What say you to how this sport has evolved over the years of where we sit right now?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's good to see you, Sharí. And Dr. Dave, I loved all the things you said before I officially came on the show about Sharí. We're just also proud of you. It is your time and keep killing it. So just a lot of love to you as well. But the sport is in a very unique spot. There were days, there were kind of like the golden era when there was the Michael Johnsons, the Maurice Greens and that era. And then I felt like I compete in a special era where especially women, in 2012, they called it the Games of the Women, where I think we won more medals than the men for the first time ever in history. And then now it feels like another special time in the sport where ushered in by a Sharí Richardson and some of the young superstars, there is so much attention on the sport. And I have just loved seeing that for the athletes. In particular, I've loved to watch Sharí grow up as a young woman, as a young Black woman, particularly. She always talks about, the responsibility that she feels to be a good role model for young girls. And we've seen her go through so much, and she did the best that she could as she was maturing, but now I feel like she has come into her own. She understands what it means to be the face of the sport. And I feel like she's a great ambassador for young women and for Team USA. So it just feels like a unique, fun time in the sport where there's so many huge stars that are fun to watch. They bring more to the track than just their athletic prowess. They got big followings, they got big personalities. And I think just like we're seeing in women's basketball and so many other sports, track and field is feeling that energy and that love. And it's just getting bigger and bigger. And I think we had our biggest viewership at the Olympic trials since 2012, like 4.5 million average viewers at the trial. So the momentum swing is up. And I'm just grateful for that because the athletes are so good. They deserve it.
Yeah, that's right. Extremely good, right? And with more eyes on the sport,
Yeah.
that means somebody's pockets are getting fatter, right? Right. So which brings me to another point. This whole idea that there's not enough viewers, right? And that's the reason why there's a pay gap, right? There was just something on Instagram that showed the difference between WNBA rookies and NBA rookies, and it's light years away. It's like $74,000 to $3.3 million,
Crazy and unacceptable.
right? And so we might as well just put that to bed. Like, there are not enough eyes. There are eyes. Tell me what's your thought about that.
Well, man, I mean, we're seeing the same thing in women's basketball, right? With record numbers of viewership on the women's side. And I do think that they are going to continue, the Caitlin Clarks, the Angel Reeses, and that crop of athletes are going to continue to help to push those numbers to go up. And they're going to be able to demand more money. And I think that that's fantastic for them. And I hope, just like women's basketball, we saw that there was a huge disparity there and they closed the gap for that. I think the same will happen in women's basketball. In track and field, if I'm honest, I don't feel that the pay discrepancy and gap has been that wide from men to women. I think that on the women's side, we've been able to find financial success and do very well. Obviously, I still think that there is some room to go and for us to grow, but it's also closing. And, you know, like I said, I'm just excited for this time in sports for women in particular, and especially in track and field, because a lot of young athletes, especially with opportunities now in college to earn money and all of those things, are getting a chance to really reap the benefits of their hard work and their excellence in the sport.
So let's talk about a gap, since we're on gaps right now. I don't believe there's a gap when we talk about the physicality and the competitiveness that exists in women's sports versus men's sports, right? And Sanya, at your peak, which I still think you're at your peak, you are the epitome, she was the epitome of greatness, competitiveness, physicality, and training. And so for Sanya, for those who may not be familiar with how we get down in track and field or on the court or on wherever we are when we talk about competitive sports, what say you to just how hard women in particular have to work and train in the competitive spaces, especially track and field?
Oh my goodness. I'm actually happy you bring that up because we so rarely get a chance to talk about that. But just to really illuminate how challenging training was, and Dr. Dave, you mentioned, I was competing one of the hardest races on the track, period, right? The 400 is not just physically challenging, it's also mentally and emotionally challenging as well, because you're having to pace yourself and you're just having to deal with so many things while you're competing. But my husband, the NFL superstar, who won 2 Super Bowl rings, came out to my practice and was like, you got it, sis. I mean, we were doing about 8 200s with 2 minutes rest. And I remember he thought, okay, you know, I'll jump in with you. He did the first one, got the second one, sat out the third one, went in the fourth one, and then was like, you know, and yeah. And so, and not to say that he couldn't do it if he wasn't training at, you know, in the same way, but it just goes to show you that even with him being as elite as he is and as in prime shape that he was, it's still a difference when you're training for track and field and the 400. And so, not to discredit any of the men, because I saw him, I couldn't do what he did. I couldn't move laterally. I couldn't backpedal. I couldn't do all of those things. But certainly what women are doing and what we were doing was very, very difficult. And I think most men, if they ever went out to try to do it, would have even greater appreciation for just how hard we work. And I would say sometimes we have to work harder because of the other things that come with being a woman, like maintaining our weight and just all of the other things that I think takes even more discipline for women to compete and to excel, you know, at the highest level. So like you said, Sharí, I mean, I'm so happy that people are seeing and respecting and appreciating how hard female athletes work to be at the top of their game.
Yeah, but you know what, Sanya? So I'm gonna push back a little bit on that one.
Uh-oh, not
I
a
think,
pushback.
I'm good for pushback. I think if you train in the lateral plane, so humans are naturally weak in the lateral plane, right? I mean, that's just how we
Why?
are.
Why?
Well, because we walk straight, right? So we're not like a crab. A crab can walk very
Yeah.
fast in a lateral plane, and we don't develop those muscles,
Huh.
right? So if she developed her muscles like he did, she probably would outperform.
So wait a minute, all I have to do is walk sideways every day.
We'll try that.
Just for no reason.
Yep.
Next
And then
time I
they'll
go
be
walk-
calling me to get you out of the asylum, insane asylum. We're like, we don't know why she won't walk straight. They just walking
I'm
sideways.
training my lateral moves. I'm
Like a
getting my
crab.
lateral muscles together.
Don't listen. So, that brings me to another question that I really wanted to get your input on. We were all, I think, shocked when Sharí could not compete because of marijuana, like cannabis. And to the extent that marijuana and cannabis is a banned substance, it can give you an unfair advantage. Tell me what your thought is. Even if you talk to her, what was your response to her, and what's your overall thought about PEDs?
So I'll say this. I didn't get a chance to talk to Sharí during that time because I didn't know Sharí well. She was new on the scene, obviously. But the reality is, especially in our sport, is that there are rules that all of us have to abide by. Now, do I always agree with every rule? Maybe not. But the reality is that that's a part of the discipline that it takes to be an Olympic champion. So I was unwavering in my stance on the fact that, listen, we are not allowed to smoke. We are not allowed to do certain things. And if you are caught doing those things, just like everybody else, unfortunately, you're going to be excluded from performing and participating in these games. And the reality is, I appreciate those parameters, right? Like, I don't want athletes coming from over other parts of the country, taking steroids and all those things. I want those guardrails in place so that I can compete fairly. So the reality is, as unfortunate as it was, and as much as I wanted to see her go and represent Team USA, and I loved all the, attention she brought to the sport. The reality is, to be a superstar, to be that person, you have to follow the rules. And she didn't do that. So, but I personally think it was a very important lesson for her. And I think that she has grown tremendously from it. I think all of us have those moments in our lives where something happens and it's like, it feels like the worst thing ever. And then you look back and you're like, man, thank God for that moment, because it got me on track. And when I look at the Sharí Richardson that's competing right now, it's a different person. And I'm sure a part of that growth came from that bad experience. And I think that, those rules have to be upheld. It's just par for the course.
Henry David Thoreau said, the path of least resistance is what makes all rivers and some men crooked. At the end of the day, shortcuts will get you cut short. Don't, right, exactly. So I'm with you on the PEDs.
Speaking of growth, Sanya, we look at Sharí Richardson and all that she's doing this year in particular, already setting PRs, personal record, and hopefully that world record in Paris, we'll see. And so when we think about personal records and world records, what gets an athlete over the hump? Whether it be, hey, I hit my PR, I want to get to a WR, or hey, I want to hit my PR.
Yeah.
How do athletes get over the hump and get in that situation where they're functioning at their optimal best and moving towards those records?
Yeah, so you look at someone like a Sharí, and how it really works in track and field when you're at your best is that your coach is trying to peak you multiple times, right? And with our system where you have to be top 3, your coach is trying to peak you for trials, then usually you're going to dip down a little bit again because you're going to get a little bit of hard training, you're going to get in the weight room again. And then you're hoping to have one more big peak for the Olympic Games, right? So I think what happens for athletes when they're able to have those performances that are either personal best or world records is when they're peaking at the right time, the conditions are ideal, and they have really good competition, right? So you look at someone like a Sydney McLaughlin-Lervoni, who in the 400 hurdles, she just has been able to peak at the right times. She executes her race perfectly. And boom, with good conditions on the right track, she's going to break the world record. We see that potentially in the men's 400 meter hurdles. In the 100 and 200 on the women's side, those records we know are a little bit tougher. They've been there for a long time. FloJo set those records back in the 80s. And so I think for someone like a Sharí Richardson to possibly get that record, she's going to have to be in her personal best shape with great competition, great conditions, and maybe she'll get there. She's a little bit ways off now. I don't want to set the expectations that Sharí is going to break the world record this year. 1071 is a ways off from 1049 in the 100, but I don't think it's out of her reach in her career.
So that to me sounds like an eternity, right? 771, 749. That seems like an eternity when you're out there on the track to try to break that. I wanted to kind of ask you about the rivalries. When we're talking about hip hop music and we're talking about like men's sports, rivalries are like, yeah, it's par for the course. That's what we do. The whole Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark thing, I feel like it's being blown out of proportion. Angel's like, what are y'all talking about?
They're both like that, and interestingly enough, the double standard. Here we are talking about it once again.
What do you think about that song?
I think it's a heavy question. I think it's a loaded question, based on what does the media choose to highlight? How do we as the community perceive athletes? What do we think is acceptable from what one person versus another? So I think it's a loaded question. I think what I will say and what I admire is that we're in a time where female athletes, especially young Black female athletes, do not feel this burden to fit into some mold or model that I think in the past used to be the case. I think even I was like that, as an Olympic champion, I felt like I had to speak a certain way and like show up a certain way, because I'm representing the country and, all of those things. And nowadays I look out into the landscape of women's sports, and you see, especially young Black women showing up fully authentically as themselves, right? Like when you see Caitlin Clark out there, like Sharí said, it's just a competitor in her. She doesn't care what color skin the person has or what they've done in the past. Like she just wants to win. And we've seen men do that over and over again, but for some reason, there's something inside of us in community where like, oh, well, maybe she shouldn't be doing that. When it's like, to me, that's the competitor in her. I recognize it. I admire it. It makes you want to root for her. It makes you want to root for them. And so I personally, the takeaway I've had is just how much I love that these young women do not care what people have to say. They're showing up in their fullness of who they are. They're bringing so much new excitement and fans to the sport, which is great overall. I just sometimes feel, and I hate that sometimes, especially someone like an Angel Reese has to carry so much weight of the negativity that comes along with it. But I feel like when we look back on this time in sport, we're going to really appreciate who she was, how she showed up, because it certainly moved the dial for women's basketball.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. This rivalry thing, there is a double standard to it, and that's what's mind-boggling to me.
I'm trying to restrain myself here, Dr. Dave, and behave on your show.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't want you to behave on my show.
Okay. I'm unleashed now. Let me just let this out.
Yeah.
I also have issues with the way the media has really presented rivalries, especially when it comes to women's sports. We talked about Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. Yeah. And the reality is we've gotten beat over the head with certain levels of imagery, with certain levels of conversation and commentary that I think actually do not play into the true competitive nature of women's sports, period.
Right.
And so we're seeing the same shots of the same two players all the time. Yeah. The same write-ups about the same two players all the time. And for me, yes, on one end, it's good for the sport, and it's good for women's sports, but on the other end, it takes the spotlight away from other women who are doing incredible things in the sports space. And also, can we finally understand that women are competitive?
Yeah.
Female athletes? Yeah. We are competitive.
And we obviously like it because we're watching.
Correct. Now, competitiveness doesn't mean we're going around saying, I have a rival, I'm going after him every 5 seconds. No, that's not what that means. Right. What it does mean is when we step on the hardwood or on the field or the court, whatever it may be,
it's going
we're ready to compete just like anybody else.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting part of this. The media spotlight is intentional. Yeah. And I think that if the media spotlight chose to put that spotlight on any number of other WNBA players, you could take your pick. Yeah. That we would have had those eyes that we were talking about when we talked about the pay gap. Yeah. We would have had those eyes a long time ago.
Absolutely.
Now we've got this story, and it's more complicated, right? Mm-hmm. We have the white black. We gotta say that's there, and they're just having a lot of fun with it. I love the way that the women are handling themselves in that media spotlight. So tell us about your partnership. You got a partnership going into these Olympic Games.
Yeah, so I have some cool things going on. So obviously I will be there in Paris with NBC commentating, which I just love that I get to do. I just also love when there's like so many new eyeballs on the sport and we get to share our enthusiasm for these athletes and for the sport and hopefully win over new fans. So I'm super excited about that. But for the partnership, my husband and I launched a pajama company last year. And a few months ago, we got the exclusive license with Team USA. So we're providing them pajamas and loungewear. Sharí, you were the first person that, I saw when I was wearing them in the interview with.
Yeah, I sure did. I got the exclusive. I have not gotten my pajama set.
I'm jealous.
I'm still waiting for my set though, but
Yeah.
I did get the exclusive.
Yeah, I want the blue ones. I want the blue one.
No, listen, pajamas for everybody. Don't you worry. I got you guys. I got you. But yeah, so it's just been incredible because I think that for us, it's like when I think about the athlete journey and what it takes to be great, rest is such an important part of that when you're at the Olympics. And so to be able to provide that reminder and that support for the athletes, we did our first gifting at the Team USA trials for track and field. And the response, the athletes were so excited to get them. And it was just, for me, it's such a big deal because I love track and field so much. It absolutely changed my life. And so to be able to continue to contribute to my sport, whether through commentating or now in this new way, it just makes me so happy. So super excited about it. Fans can also get these pajamas, loungewear sets on shopcoordinates.com. So it's just been a very exciting time in the Ross household.
You're about to go to Paris and be really great. Go break a leg, sis.
Thank you so much.
Hugs
Thank
from
you.
the cafe, big hugs.
Thanks for having me. This was amazing. Thank you.
I mean, what a conversation that was. That's a fantastic Sanya
I
Richards-Ross.
just love Sanya Richards-Ross. And here's a fun fact.
Yeah.
I actually will be shooting with her very soon
I love that.
for Essence Black Women in Sports. And
That was just fantastic, right? You guys know what I always say. There's nothing more important than your health. Now go master it. Listen, before I let you go, I'm really I'm interested to get your thought around transgender participation in sports. The question of whether or not transgender women should participate in women's sports. Tell me where you land. What side are you coming down?
Next on the Health Mastery Café.